Most of us feel safe in our own homes, especially when night falls and we can finally settle down and rest. But what if the darkness held something more sinister, like a voice on the other end of a phone call, or someone lurking just out of sight? Tonight, we're diving into true stories of terrifying, unexplained calls that shattered the peace of the late hours. These are stories of mysterious voices, eerie whispers, and calls that should never have happened. Sit back, turn off the lights, and get ready to listen, if you dare. The late night calls. A few years ago, I was living alone in a small apartment. I had just started a new job and was adjusting to a hectic schedule. Most nights, I'd fall into bed exhausted, just grateful for a few hours of sleep. But that peace didn't last long. It all started with a phone call at around 2:30 a.m. I was in a deep sleep when my phone buzzed. Half asleep, I reached over, checked the screen, and saw it was a private number. I figured it was probably a wrong number or a telemarketer, but it was odd to get calls like that so late. I declined it and went back to sleep. But not even 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Same private number, calling back. This time, I ignored it. The calls stopped for a few days, but then they started coming back. Always at night, and always around the same time, between 2 and 3 a.m. The phone would ring, and I'd feel this uneasy pit in my stomach. I started letting them ring through, ignoring them. But after a while, the calls would keep going for longer, and sometimes the caller would even leave a voicemail. Curiosity got the better of me, and one morning, I listened to one of the voicemails. It was only a few seconds long, and at first, it was just silence. But then I heard this faint breathing. It was slow and rhythmic, and it felt like whoever was on the other end was just holding the phone up, listening, waiting for me to respond. Then, as if they sensed I was listening, the breathing suddenly stopped. The voicemail ended there. After that, I was genuinely spooked. I considered changing my number but figured that might be overreacting. Instead, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would stop. For a couple of nights, everything was quiet, and I thought maybe it was over. But then one night, my phone buzzed again at 2:34 a.m. I decided to answer it. When I picked up, there was only silence on the other end, like before. I waited a few seconds, hoping whoever it was would speak. But all I heard was that same eerie breathing. I said, "Hello," but got no response. Then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice whispered, "I see you." Chills ran down my spine. I froze, too scared to move. I hung up and checked all the locks in my apartment. After that, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about who it could be, some prankster, a stranger, or maybe someone who knew me. The calls continued, each time with that same slow breathing, and each time it ended with a short, cryptic whisper, "I see you or I'm coming for you." I'd startle awake at night, glancing at my phone, dreading another call. Eventually, I called my phone provider and asked if there was any way to trace the calls. They told me that because the calls were coming from a private number, they couldn't trace them unless I filed a report with the police. So, I did just that. The officer I spoke to took my report seriously and said they'd investigate. For a while, the calls stopped again. But one night, at exactly 2:34 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. I remember lying there, staring at the screen as it lit up with "private number." I was terrified but also furious, so I answered the call. This time, there was no breathing, just silence. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was my own voice. A recording of me, saying, "Hello," from one of the previous calls. Then the line went dead. I filed another report, and this time, the police investigated further. They couldn't trace the call, but they told me to stay vigilant and to call them if anything suspicious happened. The calls eventually stopped altogether, and I never found out who was behind them. To this day, whenever I get a call from a private number, my heart skips a beat. I never want to go through that again, feeling hunted in my own home by a faceless voice that seemed to know exactly where I was. Second story, the wrong number. About a year ago, I was going through a pretty rough time. I had just moved to a new city for work, far away from family and friends, so I didn't really know anyone around me. I spent most nights at home, trying to adjust to the new environment and feeling a bit isolated. It was around this time that I started getting strange calls late at night. It began one Wednesday at around 1 a.m. My phone rang, jolting me awake. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Figuring it was a mistake, I ignored it and tried to go back to sleep. But then, it rang again. Same number. This time, I answered, a bit annoyed. "Hello?" I said. There was silence on the other end. I repeated, "Hello?" Still nothing, just the faintest sound of static. Finally, the person hung up without saying a word. The next night, the same thing happened. The same unknown number, calling around 1 a.m., then silence on the other end. I blocked the number, hoping that would be the end of it. But the following night, a new number appeared, calling at the same time. It was like whoever it was knew I blocked them and was switching numbers to get through. After a few nights of this, I started feeling genuinely unsettled. I had no idea who could be behind it. It couldn't be a coincidence that they were calling at the same time each night. And no one ever spoke, just that unsettling silence. The pattern continued, with new numbers each time I blocked the previous one. By now, I was losing sleep, dreading the sound of my phone ringing. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. When the phone rang at 1 a.m., I answered it, determined to confront whoever was on the other end. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. For a few seconds, there was only silence. But then, for the first time, I heard something. It was a whisper. A low, scratchy voice said, "I know where you are." My heart started pounding, and I instantly hung up. I turned all the lights on and double-checked the locks on my door and windows. I felt exposed, like someone could be watching me from outside. For the next few nights, the calls stopped, and I thought maybe whoever it was had finally moved on. But then, a week later, at exactly 1 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was from my own number. I froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. My phone was calling itself. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up and slowly brought the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered. There was a long pause. Then, I heard my own voice, distorted and echoing, as if it was playing back from a recording. It was me, saying hello, over and over, getting quieter each time, until it faded into silence. Then the line went dead. I was too terrified to stay in that apartment after that. I packed up my essentials that night and left for a hotel. A few days later, I ended up breaking my lease and moving to a different part of the city. I never found out who was behind the calls or how they managed to spoof my own number. But every now and then, I think back to that voice on the line, whispering, "I know where you are." And I wonder, did they ever really stop watching me? Third story, the wrong voice. This story happened to me about 2 years ago, and it still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I was working a job that required early mornings, so most nights I'd go to bed by 10 p.m. One night, around 3 a.m., my phone rang, jolting me awake. I glanced at the caller ID, and it was my mom's number. Confused and a little concerned, I picked up immediately. "Hello?" I mumbled, still half asleep. There was a pause, and then I heard her voice, but it was off. It sounded like her, but there was something wrong about it, like a strange echo or distortion. "Sweetheart, are you awake?" she asked, in this slow, almost robotic tone. "Yeah, Mom, is everything okay?" I responded, starting to feel more alert and a bit worried. Another pause. "I just wanted to hear your voice," she said, in that same unsettling, echoing tone. Her voice sounded empty, like it wasn't really her speaking. Suddenly, the line cut off. The next morning, I called my mom to ask if she'd called me in the middle of the night. She was just as confused as I was and swore she hadn't called or even been awake at that time. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe I had dreamed it or it was just a weird glitch. But the next night, around 3 a.m., I got the call again, same caller ID, same strange voice that sounded like my mom, but wasn't quite right. This time, when I picked up, she immediately said, "Why don't you come see me?" Her voice was soft but eerie, like she was repeating lines she'd practiced over and over. A chill went down my spine. I told her, "Mom, stop it. This isn't funny." But she just repeated the same line, "Why don't you come see me?" This time, her voice dragged on, almost sounding like static. I hung up, my heart racing, and decided to call my mom again in the morning. She assured me once more that she hadn't called, and I could hear the genuine confusion and concern in her voice. By now, I knew this wasn't a mistake or a prank. The calls started coming every night at exactly 3 a.m. I would ignore them, but each time, they left a voicemail. The voicemails were always the same, a low, distorted voice that sounded like my mom, repeating those strange, unsettling phrases. "I just wanted to hear your voice. Why don't you come see me?" After a week of this, I went to my phone provider to see if they could trace the calls or figure out what was going on. But they couldn't find anything unusual about the number. It was coming from my mom's actual phone. I felt helpless, like there was no logical way to stop these calls. Then, one night, the call came in as usual at 3 a.m., but this time, there was no voice when I picked up. Just silence. I waited, heart pounding, until finally, I heard something that froze me in place. It was my own voice on the line, whispering, "Why don't you come see me?" I hung up and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The calls stopped after that, but for weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been mimicking the voices of people I trusted, trying to lure me into some kind of trap. To this day, I still wonder who, or what, was on the other end of those calls, and what might have happened if I'd actually listened. Fourth story, the unknown caller. About 6 months ago, I started receiving calls from an unknown number. At first, they were random and infrequent, but over time, the calls became almost routine. It always happened around midnight, and whenever I picked up, there was never a response. I'd just hear faint static, like someone was on the other end but didn't want to speak. One night, frustrated, I decided to stay up and wait for the call. Sure enough, at exactly midnight, my phone buzzed. I picked up immediately and said, "Who is this? Why do you keep calling me?" For a few seconds, there was silence. Then I heard a low, hoarse whisper. "I'm closer than you think." I froze. My heart pounded as I glanced around my dimly lit room, feeling an intense chill crawl up my spine. I managed to ask, "What do you want?" The whisper on the other end grew quieter, like whoever it was had leaned away from the phone. "Just watching," they said, in a tone that sent a shiver through me. I hung up and quickly turned on every light in my apartment, checking each room to make sure I was alone. After that, I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a prank, maybe someone playing a sick joke. But the feeling I had when I heard that voice, it felt too real, too chilling to be a joke. For the next few nights, the calls stopped, and I thought maybe I'd scared them off. But on the following Friday night, I got another call, this time even later, at around 2 a.m. I reluctantly answered, half expecting to hear that same eerie whisper again. But instead, the person on the other end simply said my name. Just my name, spoken in a flat, emotionless voice. Then they hung up. At this point, I was genuinely freaked out. I considered calling the police, but what could I tell them? That someone was calling me at odd hours and whispering vague threats? I wasn't even sure they'd take me seriously. So, I tried to ignore it, hoping it would stop on its own. But then, one night, I got another call at 2 a.m., and this time, I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the voicemail the next morning, I was horrified by what I heard. The message was a recording of my own voice, but distorted and warped, repeating, "I see you." It played over and over, each time growing fainter, until it finally faded into silence. It felt like someone had been watching me, recording me, and now they were using my own words against me. After that, I changed my number, moved apartments, and told a few close friends about the experience. I haven't received any more strange calls since then, but sometimes, late at night, I still find myself checking my phone, half expecting to see an unknown number calling. And I wonder, what would have happened if I'd kept answering those calls? As unsettling as these stories are, they're a reminder of just how vulnerable we can be, even in the comfort of our own homes. Late-night calls, eerie voices, strange whispers, they're things we hope we never encounter, but for some, they're a chilling reality. If you ever get a call in the dead of night and no one speaks, remember these stories and think twice before answering. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe, and be careful who you let on the other end of the line.